The type of visualization shown here are heat maps. Heat maps tend to be used to show patterns and also differences, especially in situations where you've got a large number of data points and those data points do tend to form some sort of pattern. It's not as good when you're really interested in a specific data point. They can be used for tables as shown here. They can also be used in geographic maps or things like ads where we want to look at what part of an ad people's eyes gravitated toward or their mouse if it's an online ad. I think these particular examples are a really good use of heat maps. What they're showing is the New Zealand population or voting population split into 10 groups based on their age from youngest to oldest, and also 10 groups based on their income from poorest to richest. And then within each of those cells, it's showing what proportion of them supported a particular party, in this case National, in this case Labour, Green, and New Zealand First. And the darker colors indicate higher percentages, so where that party got the most support and where that party got the least support. So for instance, we can easily scan this and see the overall pattern and see that people who voted for National tended to be older and richer, people who voted for Labour tended to be younger and poorer, people who voted for the Greens tended to be younger and richer, and people who voted for New Zealand First tended to be older and poorer. We can get that sense really, really quickly. And so for getting that overall view of which type of people supported which party, this is great. If we wanted to look very specifically at an individual cell, it's less good for that. And also this is just so many cells that it's hard to get your head around. When doing something like this, it's important to consider also what colors to use. Another thing that makes this particular heat map really useful is that it's picking up on the colors of the parties, so it just makes it that much easier for us to know which one's which rather than even having to spend a second thinking about that. Just as a tip, there are lots of different tools that you can use to create heat maps. What's neat about them is often what it means is you just fill in the values in an Excel spreadsheet and it will color things for you. That's especially useful when we're not just looking at a table where we can use conditional formatting, but instead at something like a geographic map that has trickier boundaries or something like an ad. In the case of the geographical boundaries, there are tools for doing that, including a new feature in Excel called Filled Maps. But unfortunately, they tend to work better in more populated places like the US and Europe than they do in New Zealand. It's hard to find maps that correspond to, say, the regional council boundaries or the local body boundaries or something like that. You can create them yourself, but you need to have knowledge of and access to geolocation data in order to do that. Some things to keep in mind for heat maps: if there isn't a pattern or a meaningful order, these can look really busy really quickly. I mean, imagine if we were looking at these and there wasn't a logical order from youngest to oldest or richest to poorest, but it was just, again, some categories that didn't have a natural order. That would be really tricky to look at. And similarly, if there wasn't the strong pattern where different parties had different voters gravitating toward them, then it would also become really hard to look at because we just couldn't make sense of it. And as I mentioned before, think hard about the color scheme for these. In this case, linking the colors to the parties made sense. In others, the sort of traffic light configuration that we talked about previously makes sense, where one is good and one is bad depending on the points that you're trying to make. And there's other color schemes. For example, if you were doing something based on regions of the country, you might want to use the colors associated with either the region of the country or something like that. So we want to think carefully about our color choices, and also once we've made them, stick with it. So for example, if we were using this sort of display and showing younger, older, richer, poorer, and we use this color scheme, we'd want to stick with that color scheme. If we subsequently showed another slide that had different dimensions but was showing the same type of data for the four parties.